Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host and partner, Mr. Sean Francis. I am Brian Altunian. Today's conversation with two more just two dads. So there's just four dads today. We're going to be talking about an app that is so extremely useful. It's one thing to care for our children with special needs, and it's almost a daunting task to have to explain everything about what our children are going through to every single person that we encounter. And frankly, it's exhausting, and it just adds another layer of complication to the whole matter. So today, we're talking to two entrepreneurs who have put together, out of their own need, put together something that is going to be helpful for caregivers of all kinds. Very excited. Stay tuned for another episode of Just Two Dads. Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. I am Brian Altunian along with Sean Francis. Thank you for joining us on Facebook. If you have comments, please put comments in. We'll get them up on the screen. If there's questions that you have for our guests, please let us know. If you're catching us after the fact on our YouTube channel, thank you for taking the time to watch this. I think this is a valuable resource. You're going to get a lot of value out of today. Hit the like and subscribe also. Let's boost our algorithms. We're starting to get some traction, which is really great. Glad to see that making some movement. And if you're catching us on podcast outlets, thanks for making us part of your listening day. Same with you folks, our family down in the U.S. Virgin Islands on WSTX AM radio. We appreciate you all making us part of your listening day. Without further ado, we're going to get into it. Our conversation. I'm going to throw it over to Sean to say hello and then introduce our two guests for today. So again, we'll try to keep make this all about our guests. So Sean, how are you feeling today, bud?
Great, thankful, blessed, and excited and ready to just move forward with it. It's so interesting. I think the universe works in very, I don't want to say mysterious ways, but very appropriate ways. We seem to have these guests of late whose topics, subjects, and services are so related to exactly where we're at right now in life. Our son Elijah is 17. He's a senior in his last year of high school, and we're going through conservatorship and thinking of the next step, what happens after high school. And one of those things that takes place in a case such as his with autism, or if you're talking about a rare disease or whatever the case may be, is medical records. And our guests today are two men who have come up with a web-based app that alleviates a lot of the stress that comes with being able to explain one's medical history and more. And so I want to welcome to Just Two Dads, Ryan Sheedy and Bret Koncak. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having us.
Most definitely.
It's
Go ahead,
awesome.
Brian. You were going to say something.
I was going to say, I had a chance to speak on a panel for the rare disease conference down in San Diego a couple months ago, and Ryan had reached out to me saying, "Hey, I hear you're going to be here. I'd love to connect." And then I was sitting, and it was so random. There were a lot of people. There was thousands of people there at this conference, and somebody said, "Oh, by the way, have you talked to Ryan Sheedy?" I'm like, "No, but I'm looking for Ryan." And then they said, "Oh yeah, I think Ryan. I think they said at the time, oh, look for the guy in the teal suit." And I'm like, "Okay." By the way, what you're wearing today. And then as I was just randomly walking down the hall, and Bret and Ryan were sitting there, and I turned and like it was so like it was magical, right? Like God had a hand pushing us into each other's space.
Yeah,
had a great conversation. But by the way, he was not wearing teal that day. That was the funny thing about it. That particular
incognito. Yeah.
But
well, that's perfect. That's a perfect segue. So for those that are listening on podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeart, whatever the case may be, you're not able to see. If you're looking live on Facebook on the YouTube channel, you will see the teal suit that Ryan has on. I will start there. The entity that you've created. Usually what we start with is a little bit of your origin story, what makes you who you are, where your superpowers come from. But today I want to jump right into your venture, the service, the value, and then we can come back around to each of your stories and what led you to create what is known as My Mejo. See, I had to catch myself because I was ready to say Mejo, but go ahead and tell us all about that, if you each will, and then we'll get into how it came to be. But tell us exactly what it is and what it does.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I love telling that story of how we met in the hallway. That was our good friend Effie Parks from another rare disease podcast called Once Upon a Gene. It's surprising I wasn't wearing teal, which is not like me. I had somebody recently ask me, "Do you only wear teal and Mejo colors?" And I said, "Yes, I'm the chief marketing officer, and this is our advertising budget is my teal sweatshirts." But, I have a rare disease child, Reynolds. He has an ultra rare disease called Costello syndrome. About 1,000 kids in the world have it. And with Costello syndrome and like so many other rare diseases and medical complex situations, we as parents have so much information to remember, organize, share. And the majority of care happens outside of the four walls of a healthcare system. And it's put on the parent and caregiver's shoulders to manage all of that. And since the beginning, I just got really frustrated with trying to have all this information in one place. And I had an idea, if we could just have one pagers for our kids, it would help simplify our jobs as parents and caregivers. It would also allow those that are caring for our loved ones, being a doctor, a nurse, a therapist, a grandma, that they would be better off and more empowered. And came together with Brett, and we launched mymejo.com, which is a web-based app that is extremely simple, useful. It's timely. It's all of your loved ones' medications and their instructions and conditions and phone numbers in your pocket for whenever life, it gets thrown at you. And, since June of 2022, we've had thousands of families across the United States signed up, loving it, using Mejo. And we're just really excited about where this is going. And, we're really looking forward to telling you a little bit more about our story and the folks that we're helping on this journey.
Good.
I love the fact, I was going to say, sorry, Sean,
Okay.
but the other thing, the other side of it too, Ryan, I think remember from our conversation is that sometimes even just having to tell family members some of the details of what's happening with our children, and like, it's exhausting to sort of repeat the same thing, right? And when you go to a doctor's office, you have to tell the nurse, and then they bring the doctor, and the doctor asks the exact same questions that the nurse asks it. It's exhausting. And to have it all in, again, one in your hand is so convenient.
Yeah, Brian, it's exhausting, and it's also emotional. We have
For sure.
moms. There's more dads joining the platform and using the tool, but it's mostly moms to date who are saying how it alleviates the emotional piece of having to go through all of those memories when they're repeating a date of a surgery or a procedure or getting a diagnosis. And so now they can have it all in one place. And when they're asked to recite that information, they can just hand over their phone or the PDF and don't have to go through all of that emotional
Reliving that.
it for sure.
So two things. I let everyone know, what is it that I don't think you said before, at least not after we went live. What does Mejo stand for again?
Mejo stands for Me Journey or Me Journal or Medical Journey. We wanted to create a brand, an organization that could kind of grow in time as not just a journal app, but something that provides resources, connects to other things. We as parents and caregivers have so much on our plate. Our mission is to save those time, give them peace of mind, allow them to be parents, not just caregivers of these kids.
Exactly.
So coming up with a name, I'm sure like you guys for this podcast, coming up with a name for a company is harder than naming a child, right?
It's that way.
Be available. It's got to make sense. There's got to be a web domain available, and it's got to stand the test of time. And so we got lucky with the name. My wife and I brainstormed for months, and she blurted out Mejo one day, and I said, sold.
That's it. Great. My wife had a great question that she asked me once I told her about today's show. I said, you know what? I'm going to ask because I want to find out. So in terms of the records and information and data being, put in one central location, how do doctors and medical professionals play a role in that? Do families sign a release giving the doctors the permission to share the records? Do doctors need to belong to a certain network? How does all of that work?
Yeah. So like Ryan mentioned, we're really anchored on making things really simple and useful. And so, I have a background in electronic medical records, and unfortunately, a lot of healthcare and EMRs become complex and comprehensive, and that's not always what we need as caregivers. So, in terms of sharing that information, we have a really unique function that allows users in about 30 seconds to share it securely and safely via text or email. They can also download it and then send that information in those kind of one-pager views to whoever needs to get it. And what we've heard from providers is it allows them to spend more time talking about what's going to happen instead of talking about what has happened, because all that information is right there. It's intuitive to use. That's if you're sending it in advance. If you're in, the clinic room and the nurse is starting to ask you questions as part of the admission process, a lot of our families will just hand the phone over, and we talk about how, we test our solution as if we have a kid in our lap, because that's the reality of what's going on when you have a child who's not feeling well or is ill or is, seeking medical treatment. And so being able to hand that over and they can just easily scroll and get to what they need without having to explain it to them, without having to go through a login process, without them hunting and pecking for information is really powerful. So a couple of different options to go transfer that information, and then the provider can do, what they want with it at that point. If they want to add it to the chart, that's something that they can do if they have that capability.
It's kind of amazing. And so, Ryan, you came up with this idea initially and then met Bret because of Bret's amazing background. By the way, for those who are seeing this live, he's sitting down, but Bret is about 8 feet tall and just a mountain of a man. That's hence the deep voice. But brilliant background in IT, and again, electronic medical records and organizational structure. And so how long, or how, I guess the process was going at some point, Ryan, and then you met Bret and you guys came together and did this. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. We talk about things happening at the right time and for a reason. During the 100+ days that my son was in the NICU, I struggled with, the fact that there wasn't a really great tool or app to help parents like me communicate all this information to my wife, to my family members, for me to remember. And, I had this idea in the NICU to create, a simple platform. I don't have a background in healthcare or technology or anything like that, but I knew something needed to be done and it needed to be very useful. And so I created these little one-pagers for my son that had all the dates and things like that. And I just made it in a simple PowerPoint. And I would pass it out to different doctors and therapists and nurses and things like that. And I heard over and over again that, hey, this was best-in-class caregiving, that parents needed something like this. And at first I was flattered, and I would come home and tell my wife. And then I also thought, like, if this is best-in-class caregiving, there's an opportunity here to help a lot of other families. And so we created, the Mejo company. And I was just explaining this idea to friends and family. And I was having a conversation with someone because I knew I needed someone that I could partner with that would be my co-founder that had a background in healthcare and technology. I just didn't know, who to talk to. And this individual said, "Hey, sounds great, Ryan. I can't help you, but I know a guy." And I was like, love it. And so Bret and I got connected, and, I kind of gave him the elevator pitch, and he said, "I love it. I'm in." And I was like, holy cow, like, you're an executive at a major healthcare company. You're in? Why? And he said, because I love it, because it's simple and useful. And that's what parents and caregivers really need. And I'll let Bret kind of tell you, his side of the story. But that was a really cool thing to say, hey, my idea was validated by, an individual who was an executive at a very, very large company who had been working on these type of projects throughout his entire career.
Excellent.
Bret, tell us. Tell
Bret, did I get it right?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So, when Ryan approached me, I had, left Cerner. So I worked at Cerner for 16 years. It's about 1 out of every 4 hospitals in the U.S. uses Cerner systems for what they do for healthcare. So doctors, nurses, techs, registrars, billing, all the way through. And during my time there, was able to do a lot of amazing things, traveled the world, spent thousands of hours in hospitals and clinics. But like most of us who have experienced the healthcare system, after a while, when you see the same mistakes and processes repeating themselves, it can get kind of frustrating. And, I thought it was frustrating, in certain situations that things weren't changing for the better. And so, after leaving there and getting connected with Ryan, here was an individual who was looking to kind of buck the system and go change it from the outside in. And like Ryan mentioned, and this kind of shows through in the application, is it's got to be something that anybody can just pick up and go use right away. And that was really compelling, because a lot of the different solutions on the market were either geared towards a different audience, geared towards providers, geared towards payers, or were just so complex to use. Knowing, having gone through caregiving situations myself, I knew it wasn't just realistic for parents and caregivers. And so that's what got me really excited about Ryan was doing, and this idea of how do we serve an underserved group in caregivers? How do we give them tools that are simple to use that they can pick up right away, and then actually deliver real value? And so when he kind of put all that together and we started mapping out this vision for how do we become the companion for caregivers to continue to take things off their plate, got really excited about, and it kind of fell into my background of what I've done from a healthcare and technology standpoint.
Beautiful. And you were a caregiver as well, Bret?
Yep. So I've been had touches with rare disease twice over. So my youngest son, when he was 3 years old, all of a sudden became suddenly ill. We went to the Minute Clinic, went to urgent care. No one could tell us what was wrong. I was back to my primary care doctor for the second time, and the PA was about to send us home. And I looked at her in the eyes and I said, "There's something really wrong with my son. I don't know what it is, but you or someone does. You have to help me." And so she paused for a moment, and instead of discharging us back home, admitted us to the hospital, the Children's Hospital here in town. And we went there, and shortly after arriving, he was diagnosed with Kawasaki's disease, which is a rare disease that's kind of unique, and they don't actually know what causes it, but they do know how to treat it. And so we went from, a sick kid over a couple of days to spending 2 weeks in the ICU and receiving treatment in the pediatric ICU, and then getting discharged. And there's actually a 1 in 4 chance that it reoccurs. And sure enough, it reoccurred. And then we were back in the ICU for 2 weeks. And during that process, that kind of shaped some of my background for why I was so excited to join Ryan. I knew how healthcare worked. So I was able to kind of navigate some of the different things. When a doctor said no to something, I was able to push a little bit further and maybe work towards a maybe and then a yes. I was able to ask different questions that kind of, I think, expedited our care. And so after going through that situation and knowing that, I had the privilege and benefit of having worked in the industry and being able to pull those levers, that was another reason I got so excited when Ryan was going to create something to help others, because not everyone's in that position. So that was my first experience with rare disease. And then on the day that I met Ryan in person, we met for dinner, and then we were going to do a full day brainstorming session. Met for dinner, had a good time, got to meet Ryan face to face. That next morning, my wife calls me and tells me that my other son is violently ill. And so I drive 3 hours back to Kansas City, and again, went to the ER multiple times, and he got admitted. And it was a bacteria infection that in a small amount of children transforms into a rare disease called hemolytic uremic syndrome, which basically starts to shred the red blood cells and then causes organ failure.
Oh my gosh.
He went from climbing trees and running around with his cousins to 4 days later, he was on dialysis because his kidneys no longer worked.
Oh my gosh.
So
how old was he at the time?
That was 2 years ago, so he was 7. So
wow.
Out of nowhere, again, back in the hospital, we went through a series of treatments and dialysis, and there's no medicine that directly helps with the infection. You just try to keep the body sustained for as long as you can until it fights it off. And then he kind of worked his way back to health over the course of the month. So we were in the ICU there for a month there. And now he's on kind of some maintenance medication because he did have some kidney damage as part of it. So 2 instances. I think Kawasaki's disease is something like 14 in 100,000 and HUS is 8 in 100,000. So I do what a lot of technologists do. I ask ChatGPT, what's the likelihood of both of those things happening to my family? And it's something like 1 in 666 million.
I was saying 0.00000. Yeah.
So we, randomly we had the same admitting doctor and put 2 and 2 together when my second son came in, and he called it improbable for it to happen. And, my wife and I talked, and our next step was we introduced him immediately to our daughter. So there was no chance that she got to meet her in the ICU, that he met her on good terms before we brought another kid in. So,
yeah.
Sure. Wow.
Tell us about, so you went into detail about hemolytic, I forgot the word in between.
Uremic syndrome. Yep.
Uremic. Okay.
Yep.
Tell us about Kawasaki's disease. Is that autoimmune? What does it do exactly?
It is. It affects your blood, and then the risk. Well, there's 2 major things. One, if it's not treated within 14 days, it can be fatal. And so we were on day 7 or 8 after kind of bouncing around the healthcare system. The second part is if it's not treated right away, there can be cardiac issues because it does affect the blood. So in our case, we were lucky. We were able to get treatment in 7 to 8 days. The hospital we went to, Children's Mercy Hospital, a really great local regional children's hospital, they had seen 2 or 3 cases before, so they were familiar with it. It's actually a disease that you can't take a test for. It's validated by 5 kind of physical symptoms: swelling of the hands, rash, some other different things. So we were able to get the diagnosis and the treatment that we need. And luckily my son now is all good to go, doesn't have any long-term problems, and hopefully won't be impacted by it in the future.
So on that one, it's a curable disease, or at least it can be put into remission for long-term remission. And same with the other one, he sustained kidney damage. And so that will be something we'll have to monitor for the rest of his life. So he's on a maintenance medication. Kind of the way it's explained to us is eventually, if you live long enough, everyone's kidneys fail. But his, because of the damage, has a higher likelihood of failing earlier. We just don't know when. So something we continue to monitor, take some maintenance medications, and, we're hopeful that it'll be long enough that there are better answers for kidney replacement at that time to get him what he needs.
Guys, I want to give a shout out because, Bret did what he had to do. He advocated, he pushed.
Yeah.
Luckily, he had the background that he had to ask the right questions. There's a stat that only 1 out of 10 U.S. adults has the healthcare literacy that they need to understand the system.
Right. And sometimes people just take a diagnosis and then it feels like a sentence of some kind, and then they walk away. They have no idea what to do from that point forward, and nobody to really guide. And you can't get any real serious time with a doctor, and they're in and out, and where do you go for answers? And so,
that's a big part of what we've been talking about for the past, especially maybe the past month. A lot of the stuff we've been talking about is just, our responsibility. And it's funny. I've been thinking about this. The difference between oh my gosh, what is the word I'm looking for? The difference between essentially say punishment and accountability. What you do is for our situation or our lot in life, we either take no responsibility for it or we take all the responsibility or blame. The difference between blame and responsibility. If you take responsibility, you can say, look, let me own it and let me do what I can to take care of it. And very often when someone has the right letter or title behind their name, doctor or lawyer or whatever the case is, depending on our experience, we tend to feel that this person has all the answers. That's the end of that. When it comes to our health and our children's health, especially those that can't advocate for themselves, the buck stops with us. And I think what's so key and what Bret was saying is He didn't say, I know what's wrong. He said, something's wrong. You can find out. I can't just leave and accept that. There's got to be, and that goes back to what we talk about all the time too, which is questions being more powerful than answers, which is like, here's the question. What is it? I don't know what's wrong, but something is. And I think it's just a very valuable lesson for everybody to take away. And you don't necessarily have to have Bret's background to know that. Or as Ryan said, you might not know the medical lingo or jargon to use, but if you feel that something is not right, dig to find out what it is and let it be known that you know something isn't right.
Yeah, I love when people say that we're the experts in our kids and we're the experts in our kids' rare disease. We don't maybe not know the scientific parts of all of it, but we know what's going on in their daily home lives. And, it's about partnering with providers. Guys, I'll never forget being in the NICU and all these doctors were asking me all these questions. And, I was the typical guy that didn't really understand healthcare and didn't go to the doctor because I didn't really get sick. I'm like, why are they asking me all these questions? Like, don't they know, or aren't there resources for them to go look at?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They were just trying to, one, understand what I understood, and two, ask me things that I might have observed when they weren't there. Yeah. And so we have all of those clues in our heads about our kids to help them solve the mystery.
Yeah.
And for us, we want to help simplify that, because there's a lot of balls in the air. Some are on fire. Some have razor blades. Some of them are bowling balls and are coming out from every which way. And it's just an exhausting time for parents. But we hold all of that information that's key for them to help, figure out treatment plans and so forth.
And so Ryan, let's transition a little bit to Reynolds and your situation, because obviously now you've mentioned 100 days in NICU, and tell us how this all started for you.
Yeah, I'll give you the short version, but it all started at the ultrasound when my wife and I were going to confirm that we were pregnant, and we found out there were 2 babies, not just one. And so that was kind of like a holy cow Batman, all right, giddy up. I signed up for 1 and I got 2.
Instant family.
Yeah. And I'm like, who in the family has twins, and are there twins in the family and everything like that? But during Ashley's pregnancy, my wife, we didn't know that there was anything non-typical going on. We just knew that one baby was a little bit larger than the other. And, she went into the hospital on bed rest 2 weeks prior to having a scheduled C-section. We had no thought of what the NICU was, or that we would have to go to it. The delivery day happened, and everything as planned went out the window. And baby A, which was Reynolds, was 40% discordant. These are all the new words that I learned along the way. But he was 40% larger than Campbell, his twin brother. And that started our journey of, okay, I think there's something going on, but we're not really sure. And we were just trying to keep him alive at that point. He was intubated, he was, failure to thrive. During those 100 days, we went back and forth twice to a different children's hospital that was a higher level. And so I left my wife and my other son 5 days into being a new family, and went 3 hours to a different NICU. And that was scary. As a new dad, new to healthcare and to medicine and all these things, and having multiple surgeries and everything. Finally, after 103 days, and I say 103 because every day counts.
Yeah,
I was beside his crib the entire time. We were sent home with a list of upcoming appointments and procedures. We left with a G-tube. So that was another scary thing, that I now had to become a caregiver and feed my son through a G-tube. 3 months before that, didn't even know what a G-tube was. Now I'm grateful that he has one. I wish sometimes my other kids had G-tubes so I could just give them medicine and vegetables.
Sure.
And everybody knew that there was something going on, but they weren't really sure. And so we went down this, diagnostic odyssey, as you hear, of going to different doctor appointments. And, at one point he had 30 different providers trying to solve the mystery, but they were all solving it from their perspective, meaning we focus on cardiology, we focus on endocrine, we focus on gastro, but no one was really looking from it from a 30,000 foot view of, hey, these are all the things that are going on, to at 18 months got diagnosed with Costello syndrome. It's an ultra rare disease. It's genetic mutation. 1 in 300,000 kids is diagnosed with Costello. So, a little over 1,000 kids in the world that have it. He's affected across multiple systems in his body. He's medically complex. His EMR printout was 7,000 pages at the age of 3. But he's overcome so many obstacles, and I see him daily as a kid, not just who's medically complex or rare or has Costello, but he's almost a 6-year-old boy who can now run and has 10 words and has had major surgery. And that has brought so much perspective into my life.
Sure.
And has kind of lit this fire to take my previous work experience to do something kind of in the healthcare caregiving space, where I see so many parents like me, not like me, who need help, who don't know the questions to ask. And again, I wouldn't ask for it to go this way again, but I'm embracing it. And because of Reynolds and because of his rare disease, I get to meet guys like you. I meet Brett. I meet so many families. I mean, I can't even keep count anymore how many families I've met throughout this journey who inspire me daily to do more and push forward and help.
Yeah.
Well, really is amazing. I just want to say one thing. We usually leave this to the end, but Sean, I'm going to say Sean and I, but really is Sean's been driving this men's group that we have every 2 weeks. And we talk about to dads of caregivers, have a safe space to have a conversation. And so you said something, Ryan, that made me think to ask this question. And it's really some of the stuff that we cover in that group of support for you guys, for each of you. Can you share with us, the date of diagnosis is such a big thing. I remember where I was and how I felt, and date of diagnosis for me was 2 hours of, I was in a Charlie Brown's strip where the adults were talking when it sounded like wah 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 wah. I have no real memory of exactly what was happening because I'm so in my own head. For you, what you were dealing with, as you mentioned this as a new dad, and Brett, some of this stuff was totally obviously it's all unexpected, but it came to you guys differently. Will you just share a little bit your feeling of that date of diagnosis? It's such a huge thing. Ryan, I don't know if you want to go first, because as you mentioned it.
I was sitting right here. We signed up to get his genetics test. We did a whole exome. It was 12 weeks. And I asked, is it ready? Is it ready? Is it ready? Is it ready? And then we get the phone call and we had the results. Are you ready? And I was like, and I had to track my wife down. She was in a meeting.
Who's ever ready?
Yeah. I had tracked my wife. I had to track Ashley down in a meeting. And I said, hey, they got the genetics results. She left a meeting. I conferenced her in, and the genetics counselor said, okay, we had the results to his genetics test. Do you want them? Like, are you ready for them? We're like, yeah. It was almost like kind of a formality. And she said, Reynolds has Costello syndrome. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. Like, what the heck is it? And where is your compassion vacation?
That's where the wah 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 comes in.
A million questions. And it's a natural thing to go Google, what is Costello syndrome, as she's talking.
Sure.
Because now we had this, like, I don't want to say golden ticket, but we now had like a label to it.
An answer. Yeah.
So that we had, but there weren't that many cases and there wasn't that much research and resources through that. And my wife is more calm than I am. She's we'll worry when we're told to worry. I like to try to have like the brace for impact type of deal and have everything ready to go. And we just kind of went from there. And 2 weeks later, we got to meet the geneticist, and the geneticist said, Reynolds has Costello syndrome, but Reynolds also has Reynolds syndrome. And I was like, holy cow, that's his name. That's a coincidence. My wife was like, no, you dummy. Like Reynolds has his version of Costello syndrome. And that was really my aha moment to go, okay, we're going to treat Reynolds Costello syndrome, but we're also going to give Reynolds the life that Reynolds should have. And that he is not defined by this diagnosis. It is the diagnosis where people need to know about his treatments and eventually schools and IEPs and things like that. But I need to be the best dad for him. And so wearing, as you see in our titles, we're dads, caregivers, and co-founders. All of those kind of things lead up to all of that. But you kind of heard us say this earlier. We want to save caregivers time so they can be moms and dads. Mm-hmm. Because there is such a definitive line in that sand when I am being Reynolds' caregiver, giving him shots and things like that, to kicking the ball around and teaching him those type of things.
You know, Sean's diagnosis for Elijah was 16 years ago. Mine for my daughter was 25, 26 years ago. Well, we didn't have a lot of resources. We didn't have Google. But the thing that ties us together, and Ryan, we're not Barbara Walters, so I'm not really trying to make you cry. We cry all the time on this show because we're so impacted by the conversations that we have. But you kind of share with us the to-do in all of this. As a dad going through that process, how was that for you?
It was tough. I mean, and Brett chime in too. Like, we're fixers, right? We're natural fixers. We're not like nurturers by trait, right? And so I immediately went into this, like, how do I fix it? How do I call every single person? How do I find out all the answers? And that was tough. And you know, I think we talked about this before. I retired early to be Reynolds' caregiver. So my wife is the breadwinner. We have a complete role reversal. And you know, Brett will share his experience. And so for me, I kind of had to take a step back, because the majority of time when I was at the doctor's with him, they were asking if mom was coming. Yeah. And that made me feel like, what do you mean? Like, I know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
But for the majority of time, mom has been driving that bus. To still today, the system and different systems still call my wife, even though I'm listed as the primary phone call, because that's not the norm. Right. And I don't think that's it's not a bad thing. I see more and more dads, you know, jumping in. There's just this thing that it's not the norm.
Yeah. You don't call this Just Two Dads for nothing. Like, we get it.
Well, today we're just 4 dads.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah. Living, by the way, different diagnoses. I was just really quick, just different diagnoses, but still sharing that experience. Like, we feel our own as you're describing yours, just so you know. Like, we share this.
That's why I love it. I'm so thankful for the platform that we have and the opportunity to do the show, is because I didn't expect to not relate to any of you guys' story, but yet I'm relating to it even more than I thought I would, because because your children make you so weak, yet so not just strong, but mighty, and you will do anything for them. And anybody that has a child can relate to that. You know, anybody. Brett, go ahead and tell us if you will about
your experience too.
Yeah, sure.
See if we can make you cry in all of this as well.
Yeah, the first time with my youngest, I mean, it was just so fast. We couldn't find an answer. He was sick. We got admitted. There was a measles outbreak locally, so everyone was in spacesuits because he couldn't get diagnosed right away because there's no test.
That doesn't even happen.
I don't know, but because there's no test, he had to be physical signs and whatever, and it was just chaos. And they told us it was Kawasaki's disease. They told us we don't know why it happens, but we can treat him and do all this stuff. And so that was just kind of a whirlwind of time. I do remember sitting in the ICU and thinking, this is the only thing that my wife and I are focused on, yet the rest of the world keeps going? How do I hit a pause button on the rest of life? There's bills coming in, there's school activities, there's work stuff, all of those things. And I remember sitting that like, got to find a better way to make it easier on caregivers. But it was really a quick whirlwind. The second time, what stands out to me the most is, I'd been out of town meeting with Ryan. I raced back. My son's not feeling well. I had a milestone birthday actually the next day. And I was in taking him to the emergency room, and he wasn't feeling well. And I had all these thoughts racing. And then they told us he was really sick and going to be admitted. And I had come in worrying about 1,000 things. And now when a loved one's sick, only one thing matters,
right?
Making sure that they're better. And I had to kind of do some introspection around, I felt guilty because like how selfish of me to be thinking about all of these other things and worrying about work and what I was going to do for my birthday was going to be postponed and all this. And my son was so sick. And it's something I reflect on often because I think all of us benefit sometimes from taking a deep breath and pausing. And, there's a quote about this too, right? When you're healthy, 1,000,000 things matter to you. When you're sick, only one thing matters to you. And so it's really helped me kind of focus at times, recenter on what's really important instead of worrying about all this other stuff.
Right.
So I've kind of used that as a reminder. When I was in the ICU, my birthday is also my Father's Day. So Father's Day occurred and they gave all the fathers like a little bracelet. So I sometimes wear that as my reminder to what's really important in this crazy world of everything going on. How do I focus that?
And your second diagnosis was during COVID as well, right? It was a bunch of
yeah, it's just 2 years ago. Yeah. So
happening as well. So I would think that would have been, a concern, complication, part of the.
There was the hospital was definitely more full. There were all kinds of different things about, considerations. Staffing wasn't always able to show up because COVID still had an impact on all of those things. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me ask you guys each this, whichever one wants to go first. And it's kind of all tied into one because I mentioned that we would get back to, where you're from, not geographically speaking, but where you're from in terms of how you were raised. But those things go together because I always feel like how you were raised determines how you face the stuff that, the challenges that a diagnosis brings. But I'm thinking of that, but especially as it relates to faith. We're not a religious show, but you're obviously like we all have faced times where there's like, all right, I've done all I can do. I need to reach out to someone else higher than myself. I don't know how deeply, faintly religious or spiritual each of you are. Tell us about that in terms of just how you deal with the challenges that come along and the manner in which you're raised and what kind of role that plays in everything.
Yeah, for me. So, again, it started at the ultrasound, but I think it started even before that. You can plan as much as you want to plan, but you're not in control.
For sure.
And again, that you can look at that from a religious perspective. You can look at that as a universe thing. But it's about how you can adapt to situations. I grew up, both of my parents have chronic illnesses. You'd never know.
Wow.
My mom uses a wheelchair. She has multiple sclerosis, doesn't talk about the pain, the suffering that she goes through. It's just part of her life. And she chose to live like that, not to have MS, but to live going forward.
To live, period. Yeah.
And to not let it bog you down. And I think that's really kind of my upbringing and my inspiration is to, deal with the things that come up. But, I heard the other day something like we only have a couple thousand weekends in your life.
Right.
For sure.
Live for the weekends.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think that's that, I grew up in Pennsylvania and I grew up with two brothers and blah, 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 this, but I grew up with two parents who taught me to push forward. And I do that as a dad. I'm a stay-at-home dad. One can question being a stay-at-home parent when your kids go to school, but I'm constantly still doing stuff. Brett and I often talk about, being a caregiver is not, a full-time job. It's an everyday job. I mean, I'm getting pinged as we're on this conversation about some medical.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I try to show my boys that, life is fun. There will be tough times, but to try to keep a positive outlook. And Bret helps me with that too daily. I mean, we talk about, the app, the platform, and how we help caregivers, but we also just talk about being dads and football and life.
Yeah.
Me and Sean, same thing. I get it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And Bret, for you, your upbringing?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, two things stick out. One, I'm a fairly independent person. I don't mind doing stuff, on my own. But in those times of crisis, you have to lean on other people and other things, whether that be your faith, whether that be your partner, whether that be extended family members, et cetera. And I think it's a good reminder of how powerful those other forces can be, and helpful in different times. When you're, like I said, you can't hit a pause button at the rest of your life. So being able to lean into other people and know that they're there for you. And so I think that's part of the upbringing, that, there was always a willingness to help. You just had to ask. And so really kind of pushing yourself to ask and go do that. And then, a little bit like Ryan talked about, I've always been a believer of control the controllables. What is in my domain to control? What can I have an impact on? And the things I can't control, then I just have to kind of let that go and really focus on what I can. And so, again, one of those things you can control is asking for help, and that's important, and advocating on behalf of your loved one. But there are other things that are just going to happen, and you kind of have to ride those waves. So that's how I kind of think about it.
Guys, can I add one thing?
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
of course.
I know this is just two dads, and Bret and I talk a lot about Mejo and the platform and everything like that. And I think I can speak for you, Bret. Like, we're very fortunate to have amazing spouses, and so in our equation, it's not just dad.
For sure.
Oh yeah.
A lot of things in the background. I mean,
yeah.
Bret's wife is an executive, as well as my wife is an executive at very large companies. But when they come home, their mom, and they're a caregiver, and they spend weekends making food and going to doctor's appointments and things like that. So, it's truly a huge thing to have a great partner in this journey.
It's everything.
Not everybody is that fortunate, but golly, I'm glad we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And listen, we obviously want everybody to get a chance to look at your app. I think the mymejo.com, people should go download it, explore, play with it. But for us as dads and as men and caregivers ourselves, and to be able to have this time with you guys, and for people to learn about who you are, the sort of like the men, the diagnosis, the reason why this app has come together, right? Why it's almost as valuable to know more about you guys as people, and as dads, and as husbands, and fathers, to caregivers. And that's such an important part of the equation. And so I'm a huge fan. Obviously, we got a chance to spend a little bit of time together before, and I'm a huge fan of what you guys are doing. I wish you tremendous success. We want people to check out the app, and if there's anything that we can do to help, promote, because I think what you're doing is, it helps us, it helps our community significantly, and I think it's so impactful because it alleviates a lot of that stuff that you talked about, the emotionality, the going through the details of every aspect. Sometimes when we're in it for a few years, we forget about some of the things that happened early on in the process, and so having this app is so valuable, and I'm grateful for you for creating this. And I know it was born out of necessity, but we got a chance to spend some time with you personally as well. I'm gonna throw it to Sean to ask. We asked this question at the end, because we're coming to the end already, if you can believe, of this conversation. I know it goes so fast. So much more stuff that we can talk about. But this next question that Sean's going to ask, again, will just sort of round out that, the idea, the personal aspect of who you guys are. So I'll shut up and let Sean take over. ask that question.
And then I was just going to ask, we have we put the website up there. Is it available at App Store and Google Play as well?
No, it's a web app, so there's nothing to download. It's accessible on any device, and it's 100%,
Gotcha. Okay.
100%
right.
free.
Yeah, and here's how to let you know, boys and girls,
free.
you too can host a podcast, because in the beginning of the podcast, I actually said that it was a web-based app. And then during the show, I went to the App Store to look for it and then asked if it was available there. So you just have to be able to persevere. You don't have to be that bright to host the podcast.
All good.
But we come to the portion of the show where Brian has mentioned, our ability to change the world is in some way, great or small, tied to our ability or our willingness to change ourselves. So with that in mind, if you can each give us an example, just one, of a belief or thought that you once really felt strongly, but no longer believe to be true.
You want me to go first? All right. So where my mind goes to when I hear this question is healthcare, right? I've spent 20 years in healthcare. I've talked to all kinds of healthcare professionals. And, I think there's this mysticism and romanticism around healthcare, around doctors and nurses and providers and the system and all that stuff. And there's a lot of great people doing great things. But what stood out to me over this time is they're just human beings. They're just like us. There's good days, there's bad days. They do brilliant stuff. They do stuff where maybe there's challenges or mistakes. They're fallible. And I think for me, what sticks out when I had this belief that healthcare, it's like out of a Disney movie. You have an injury, you go in, they help you out, you come back, it's all well and good. But the reality is there's so many other forces that they have to deal with, and all of these pushing and pulling of what's going on. And so instead of waiting my turn for healthcare, I'm now a big believer in taking your turn in healthcare. And so that means really advocating on behalf of your loved one, asking the other question, pushing for what you know is right. And I'm not implying that this means it's always going to go the way you want it to or the way that you should, but you should feel empowered to go take your turn instead of waiting your turn. And I'll tell you, for me personally, one of the ways I help myself do that is through visualization. And so I think about, what would I ask the mechanic if I didn't understand what they were explaining to me about my car? Why wouldn't I send back food if I purchased it if it was wrong? And translating that to that same thing to healthcare. Why am I not asking the question when it's actually about my loved one who I care about a million times more than my vehicle? Why am I not questioning or sending back this information that my gut is telling me I'm wrong when I would do that for food? And so that to me is kind of my trick to help me take my turn instead of waiting my turn. That's the biggest realization that I've kind of come through after working in healthcare.
Excellent. Love that. You, Ryan?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it earlier. It's we can plan, we can have all these thinkings of who we're going to be and what we're going to be. And that just needs to go out the window. And, life has a way. What is it from Jurassic Park? Life finds a way.
Yeah.
I've learned to adapt to more things, learn to be more open-minded, try new things. I was just literally thinking about this. When you're a kid, you push back on your parents because you don't want to eat broccoli. You got to eat broccoli. And then you get older and you're like, broccoli's not bad. And then you have kids and they don't want to eat broccoli and you're trying to convince them to eat broccoli. And so, I often just sit back and remember sometimes being a kid and to not be so hard on my kids because they're just curious and they're asking questions. I'm sure we all have lived this as dads when your kid asks you why. And our first instinct is probably because our father said it because I said so.
Because I said so. Yeah.
I said so.
And that's penalizing them because they're just curious. They don't know.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to teach them. Now, when you have your 3-year-old going, why? It kind of gets a little frustrating and things like that. But I think for me, it's to go with the flow a little bit more and to just kind of ease up on things and not be so, I have a path. I got to do everything I need to do to get to that final destination.
Yeah.
Just so you know, for me, it was Brussels sprouts. I think Brussels sprouts are the greatest vegetable in the world, and I couldn't imagine eating them as a child. So, right there with you.
I haven't evolved in that regard. Broccoli, yes. Brussels sprouts.
Oh no,
Still not crazy about them.
Done right, they're the best.
I've had them done a variety of ways, but yeah.
Guys, thank you for this valuable time. Love every time we have a conversation. I love what you guys are doing even more. Mejo.com. Please go check it out, download it, use it. It will save you so much time and effort, energy, emotion, et cetera, et cetera. And if you know somebody who's a caregiver, forward this. Again, it'll be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. Forward this and share with them, because Mejo is such a valuable resource. And you can see it was created out of need and also out of love. So thank you guys for taking the time with us today. As we wrap up the show, as I bang on my microphone, as I like to always say, empathy and love is always, is needed, not today, almost more than ever. Today, more than last week, and more than the week before. If you see somebody and they're going through something, have some empathy. You have no idea what they're dealing with. No idea. We have two gentlemen here who are dealing with not just rare diseases, but ultra rare diseases. And what they have had to go through and what they currently go through, you have no idea. So be empathetic, as Sean always says, ask questions before being judgmental. And then if you look at the world through the lenses of love, the world is just a better place. That's where we can all learn to evolve a little bit more. With that, thank you guys. I'm going to throw it to Sean to close us out, and thank everybody for catching us up on podcasts and YouTube and Facebook. Sean and Joe, my daughter Joe was in here saying hello so earlier. Thanks. Hey Joe. Good, Sean.
I just want to again thank you guys for the time again with us here today. And then, for those that are listening to the podcast after the fact and not necessarily seeing it, it's www.mymejo.com. And then at the same time, we also want to make sure that we encourage you to, if you're looking for shoes that are for, adaptive footwear, one of our sponsors, Billy Footwear. You click on the link that is shown and you'll get an additional 10% off of your purchase. And if you want to reach out to us, you can do so at We Are Just Two Dads. That's all spelled out. We Are Just Two Dads at gmail.com. And you can find out about the Den, which is our men's group. We're meeting this Sunday, quite frankly. And again, questions are more powerful than statements. We need to make sure that we do everything we can to remain more childlike and less childish. And if you're within the sound of my voice, we thank you and we love you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you again soon on Just Two Dads.